Hey, and welcome back to DATQVAULT video lectures. In this video, we're going to cover the Wittig reaction, which is a very common carbon-carbon bond-forming reaction in organic chemistry. But remember that not every single topic we cover in this lecture series is going to appear on your specific DAT exam. Standardized tests are randomized samples, and each test is going to be completely different. So, however, the greater exposure you have to the breadth of material potentially covered on your specific DAT, the more likely it is that you will score very well on this exam. So, really focus on learning and, more importantly, comprehension of the material. So, to comprehend the Wittig reaction, the first thing that you need to know is that the reaction involves either an aldehyde or a ketone, and this molecule called a phosphorus ylide, which has a positive charge on phosphorus and a negative charge on the carbon bonded directly to phosphorus. When you take these two molecules and mix them together in a solvent such as THF, we form our carbon-carbon bond. In the case of the Wittig reaction, we form an alkene, and then we also form the byproduct triphenylphosphonium oxide. So this phosphorus ylide might be a little bit daunting and complicated, but later on in this lecture we'll cover the phosphorus ylide and why it actually has a structure such as this and how that allows it to participate in the Wittig reaction. Alright, but first let's go over an example Wittig reaction because the one that I just showed you was pretty generic. So let's take this ketone here, which is 3-pentanone, and then let's mix it with this Wittig reagent here, where we have an ethyl group attached to phosphorus. So if we remember from the previous slide, we're basically going to join the alkyl portions of these two reagents here to form our carbon-carbon bond. Again, THF is a very common solvent for the Wittig reaction, and it results in this alkene here and the byproduct triphenylphosphonium oxide. Alright, so first thing that we're going to look at in the Wittig reaction is actually the phosphorus ylide, which is the key molecule in the Wittig reaction, really. So how do we form these phosphorus ylides and why do they look the way they do? So the first thing that we're going to do to form our phosphorus ylide is to simply combine triphenylphosphine, which has a lone pair of electrons on the phosphorus, and we're going to react it with some sort of alkyl bromide. It's important to note that the alkyl portion of your alkyl bromide, or really any kind of alkyl halide in general, doesn't have to be exactly bromide, it could be iodide or chlorine as well, but this alkyl portion is going to be the portion that forms the other carbon-carbon bond of our Wittig reaction. So this lone pair of electrons is going to displace bromine from this alkyl bromide, SN1 style or SN2 style, depending on how sterically hindered this carbon is of your alkyl halide. And then you form what's called a phosphonium salt, where the negatively charged bromine is going to be the counter ion for your now positively charged phosphorus since you're donating an electron pair. It's also important to note that you must have either a primary or secondary alkyl halide for this reaction to actually occur to form your phosphonium ylide. And that's because the next step of forming your phosphonium ylide is to use some kind of extremely strong base to deprotonate the alpha hydrogen on the carbon directly bonded to the now positively charged phosphorus. This base is going to deprotonate this hydrogen here on the alpha carbon. Electrons in the carbon-hydrogen bond are then going to go to the carbon. Once this reaction happens, we form our phosphonium ylide, which now has a negative charge on the carbon and a positive charge on the phosphorus. Phosphonium ylides may not look that stable and they look kind of strange, but they actually are very stable because of the resonance structure that you can draw from the lone pair of electrons on this carbon going into the carbon-phosphorus bond. Once this happens, you form this resonance structure over here where there's no longer a positive and a negative charge. But phosphonium ylides, when you draw them, are most commonly drawn with this charge difference, and that actually helps you visualize the mechanism of this reaction, which we're going to talk about next. Alright, so what does the mechanism look like for the Wittig reaction? The first thing that you're going to want to do if you're trying to figure out what the product is of a Wittig reaction is you're going to want to line up the phosphonium ylide, represented here, with your carbonyl, represented here, so that a positive charge is lined up directly with the negative charge or the partial negative charge on the oxygen of the carbonyl, and that the negative charge on the carbon of the phosphonium ylide is lined up with the partial positive charge on the carbon of the carbonyl. Since carbonyls are extremely polarized between the carbon and the oxygen, this is what they kind of look like charge-wise. So the fact that we have a negative charge lined up with a positive charge, and the negative charge of the carbon here lined up with the positive charge, partial positive charge in the carbon of the carbonyl, we can actually draw reaction arrows now. So electron pair in this carbonyl oxygen double bond is going to come over and attack the positively charged phosphorus, and the negative charge in the lone pair of electrons on this carb anion is going to come in and attack the partially positive charged carbon of the carbonyl. Once this happens, we form this kind of strange looking intermediate, this four-membered ring. What's important to notice about this structure is that the two carbons are bonded directly to each other now, and the oxygen is now bonded to the phosphorus. The next arrows that we have to draw to break down this structure to form our alkene and our carbon-carbon bond in general is to take this carbon-oxygen bond and break it and donate the electrons into the phosphorus-oxygen bond, forming a double bond there. And then we take the electrons in this phosphorus-carbon bond and we break that bond and donate those electrons to the carbon-carbon bond. Once this is all said and done, we form our alkene here, and then we form triphenylphosphonium oxide as our byproduct. Alright, so let's do a sample DAT question. This question's pretty complicated, so you might not see one quite this complicated on the DAT, but it kind of covers all the ideas behind the Wittig reaction. So here we're asked to identify the proper intermediate in this following chemical transformation. So why don't you go ahead and take a second, pause the video, try to answer this question to the best of your knowledge, and then we'll solve it together. Alright, so now that you've had a second to try to solve this Wittig problem, we're going to solve it together. So on the DAT, of course, the whole exam is computerized, and you're just given some kind of a white dry erase board to draw on for each of the questions, represented over here by this box. So the first thing that I do when I try to approach problems like this is I try to just eliminate problems that are obviously wrong. And we can do that for this problem on the Wittig reaction by actually drawing out what we think the intermediate is going to look like. So remember that the oxygen in the Wittig reaction of the carbonyl is going to have a partial negative charge, and the carbon's going to have a partial positive charge, and the phosphorus is going to have the positive charge, and the carbon is going to have the negative charge. So you form a bond here between the oxygen and phosphorus and the carbon and the carbon. If we want to draw this out in a more simpler form, it's going to look something like this for a four-membered ring, and then the carbons are going to have their substitutions on them. Alright, so let's start eliminating some possible choices. We can immediately eliminate choice E because it's not even a four-membered ring. And then we can start eliminating some of these choices up here based on what atom is bonded to which atom. If we notice in answer A, the carbons aren't even bonded to each other. In the four-membered cyclic intermediate of a Wittig reaction, the carbons must be bonded to each other because we're forming a carbon-carbon bond. There's no way we can form a carbon-carbon bond using this intermediate or intermediate C. So A and C are immediately eliminated. Notice we're eliminating things very quickly now to get to a single answer. So let's look at just B and D now. What are the differences in these two intermediates? Notice that this one has only 3 methyl groups and option D has 4 methyl groups. So if we notice up here, we only have 3 methyl groups in our starting materials. We can't just gain a single methyl group. So option D is going to be eliminated, leaving us with B as our answer for the intermediate of this Wittig reaction. So I kind of want to leave you guys with saying that there are 30 questions on the organic section of the DAT. So for each of these topics we're covering here, you're really only likely to see 1 and at maybe most 2 of these types of problems on the real exam. However, the difference between getting a 25 versus a 26 right can boost your DAT score for that section by 1 point, which really might not seem like a lot, but getting in the dental school is really competitive, and the more you can distinguish yourself from the rest of the pack, really the better off you are. So it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about focus on learning and really comprehending this material, and then you'll do terrific on the DAT exam. So remember that there are specific questions pertaining to this topic that you can answer and take practice quizzes on, so I suggest you do that right now. And if you really need to go back and re-listen to this lecture to solidify these ideas, I highly suggest that as well.